So if a real estate agent gets a call today, someone's going through a divorce, they want to move out, are there any questions that they should ask right off the bat? Anything that they just need to know immediately to help set them up for success?
Yeah, so
Hi, I'm Jess Uphoff, and this is this episode of Jess'd In. I'm here with my co-host, Elise Santani, and we have Sean Peak, who is a family law attorney here locally in Denver. And Peak and Vasquez is the name of his law firm. And what I want to know, Sean, is in today's world of housing affordability being at an all-time low, how are people affording to get divorced and live in separate spaces? I'm fascinated to know how that's working.
yeah, I mean, it's a hard, so every divorce is unique, right? And so the ability of one family may have a solution to that question and it would be very different from another because, everybody has varying means,
Yeah.
right? And so it definitely causes a lot more challenges. And unfortunately, it causes a lot more litigation. We do see a little bit of a spike in divorces when you have people with financial stress and they can't afford to pay their bills and they can't afford to go through, a normal week without stressing about, can we afford dinner? Can we make the car payment? Can we do all that? So a lot of times that stress leads to, relationship issues.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I know people who are really not married. I mean, on paper they're married, but they don't sleep in the same rooms. They literally hate each other and they're just still living under the same roof because they can't afford to separate. They can't afford to pay the bills on their own. They can't afford for their mortgage and for rent.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of creating this funnel of just toxic negativity in the household, and it breaks my heart. And, but it's what I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the best solution is.
Well, and homeowners all have these rates, these COVID rates being in the 2 to 3s, right? And so that's their interest rate for their marital home. And then if they want to divorce and go into separate housing situations, somebody gets to stay in the marital home typically, right?
Yeah.
And then somebody has to go out and face 6+% interest rates.
Yeah.
In
an ideal world, you would see that people would stay in the home. Somebody could stay in the home, especially when you have kids and they need to get through high school or kind of send them off to college. You want to have some stability for them and consistency in where they're at. But the reality I think that you find is that people, when they're living their lives, and this is super normal, that they live right at or just above their means, And so when you're talking about separating two people, creating two separate houses, two separate stacks of bills, people can't afford it.
No.
Right. And especially when you have some families, they have kind of a stay-at-home parent and the other person kind of is the breadwinner, so to speak. Now all that stay-at-home parent, they're going to need to kind of retool and figure out how to get back into the workforce. And so that causes challenges in it as well. And so in an ideal world, you could have somebody stay in the house, figure out how to refinance the house so that you can get the other spouse off the mortgage, which comes with a higher interest rate inevitably now. And then depending on the equity, that may not even be possible, right? And I find that, I don't know if this is true, I'm not in mortgage, but usually you can kind of refinance for up to about 80% of that equity.
That's about right. Yep.
And so if somebody has to pay out half of whatever equity is in that house and there's just not enough equity to pull half and get to that 80% and you're stuck and they can't pay them out, you're kind of stuck in a situation where either that person has to take less money or you sell the house or you make up for it in other assets if those are available.
Yeah.
Right? So it makes it really, really challenging. And so, to your point, you do see people living in houses together post decree. That's not super uncommon.
Yeah.
Which then brings in issues with kids.
Right.
How do you kind of show a good co-parenting front with your children when you just can't stand each other?
Yeah.
And you're in the house and you're fighting. And then, so these economic times definitely are challenging for people.
I was so excited to have you on because obviously a lot of real estate agents listen to our podcast, and this is a problem that's happening not only in Colorado, but all over the United States. And I know personally some agents that I've talked to, and they get these phone calls from, to your point of someone stays at home, someone works. So if you are a stay-at-home mom, your husband works, and you're like, not really into you anymore. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
I would imagine that you feel like, but what am I going to do? I don't work. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't afford to divorce you. I can't. What's the reality behind it?
Yeah. So again, it's circumstantial, right? Depends on the means of the family, right? So if you have, let's say in that circumstance or in that hypothetical, you have like a stay-at-home mom hasn't worked, they have some equity in their house, and the husband's like, I'm out of here. Like I'm off dating my receptionist or whatever, like chauvinistic shit goes on.
Totally the receptionist.
You know,
You can swear on our podcast.
Yeah, we swear.
Cool. Yeah, so he bounces, and yeah, there's an emotional component to it, right?
Yeah.
Because this spouse is thinking like, well, we've accumulated this whole life together. We have all these assets, and we have these children, and we have all of these things. And now he wants to leave and take all of that because of a decision that he made. And that makes it really challenging. And it goes both ways, right? And so like if a wife decides to leave and the husband is like, well, now all of a sudden, like she's cheated on me and I've worked my butt off my entire life and now she's taking half my crap and she's going to go live off with this other guy.
Yeah.
Like it's just like, you know, it's a punch in the face.
Yeah.
Right. And so once you can kind of manage the emotional issues of that, which are something that a court is never ever going to really get into. Right?
Yeah.
They just, it's a business transaction.
Yeah, totally.
But for attorneys, it's not. It's really, really hard to kind of say, okay, look, let's process those emotions. Let's get through those. And then let's talk about the business aspects of this part of your life. And so long answer to your question. You know, in that circumstance, we have tools like maintenance or spousal alimony. And there's definitely going to be like child support issues that are going on. And the court is super, super sensitive to the fact that that wife is going to need time to like retool, pick a career, start to kind of rebuild a life. If that wife's going to stay in the house, you know, and again, in my experience, I've seen if you get a certain term of alimony or maintenance that lasts, I think it's like 3 years, then you can start to use that as income to qualify for the mortgage. And so even if that spouse can't go out and find like, you know, a big ballin' job where she's making 70, 80, 90, $100,000 a year, even if she's making 60, 50, 60,000, sometimes that alimony can kind of bridge that gap to kind of help her stay in that house and then continue to retool to supplement the income once that alimony's over. And if it's a really long marriage, if they're in their 50s or 60s and they've been married for 20, 30 years, that spousal alimony can be pretty significant. And so
I bet if they're married 30 years, they're like, this is way too much of a hassle. Just you sleep in that room and we'll call it good.
Yeah. Well, it's the divorces too. Sometimes when you have, I hate to say it, but when you have really affluent clients, sometimes that argument and that tango is just they can use their finances or their means to just perpetuate that.
Yeah.
And so you see people kind of like filing for divorce, spending thousands and thousands of dollars to argue with each other just to see if they can get the one up.
Yeah.
And then they dismiss the divorce because they get back together.
That's so dumb.
And they use kind of that system to kind of perpetuate that fight and they've got the money to do it.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's super frustrating.
Yeah.
But,
I've always heard that in situations like that where they're very affluent, that one of them, usually the initiator of the divorce, will go and put under retainer all of the top divorce attorneys so that their spouse can't retain that divorce attorney.
Sure.
That's a thing.
Well, and you don't even, yes, it is very much a thing.
Wow.
And you don't even have to get them under retainer.
Oh.
Right? Like you could literally go and visit you know, all of the top divorce firms and then kind of keep track of that, who you met, and you can sit back and be like, well, I did a consultation with that. Just the fact of sitting down with an attorney creates an attorney-client relationship.
Wow.
There's privilege there. And it's not to say that the other spouse couldn't potentially go out and hire that other firm. I mean, we have like abilities to do like walls, and we can like barricade the one attorney to separate that attorney and the work. It's very hard to do. There's got to be conflict waivers. And there's got to be like sometimes even permission from the court to do it. But yes, like you don't even have to go spend $2,000, $2,000, $2,000, $2,000, $5,000, $5,000. You don't have to do that just to kind of block it up.
What's some advice you have for people that think they might be getting a divorce in the next, I don't know, 12 months? What are some things that people can do, not to be vindictive like what we were just talking about, but just to prepare?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I say to somebody when they're coming to me and I can tell that they're not quite ready to do it, is I tell them that I won't like retain with them until they are ready, but I will tell them about the process. I'll give them basically low down the scoop, and I'll say, here are the things that you should be mindful of. Here are the things that you should be looking for. Like, just keep track. If you see bill statements come in, just take copies of them, like snap pictures of them. You don't even need the whole statement, just account numbers, right? Those types of things. If you're distrustful that the other person's not going to be forthcoming with the money.
Yeah.
Like, that's really important to do, just to kind of like document the things that are coming and going. But mostly with kids, right? Like that's really where this question kind of hits me, right? And if they haven't quite gotten to the point where they're ready to do it and they have kids, you know, I always try, if the other parent is a good parent and they just don't get along, like, it's important to remember that when you're getting a divorce, like, your kids aren't divorcing the other person, right? They are still in their life, right? And both parents have a fundamental right to care for these kids. And the kids have a fundamental right. And that's the thing that gets lost in court a lot. The kids have that right too, to have a relationship with both of their parents. And so, you know, most cases typically end up in an equal parenting time situation. And so when I'm talking to people, I really want to get that across to them, that maybe not at first, maybe not at a temporary orders hearing, maybe not even at the first permanent orders hearing, but at some point, if that parent is diligent enough, you are going to miss half of your child's life.
Yeah.
You know, and I try to reiterate that point to them. So if you're contemplating it and you're going to say in the next 12 months, you need to kind of prepare for this, you need to be prepared for all of it, right?
Yeah.
You need to be prepared if you're the stay-at-home mom and you guys are like whipping off to Aruba and doing all of these really amazing things, that kind of lifestyle is going to be tapered to some degree. I mean, you are entitled to kind of maintain a certain aspect of your life, but at the same time, you know, the other spouse is not totally entitled to like support you for the rest of your life either. And so I always try to give them the reality of what's going to actually happen, the expectations, and then tell them, like, here is what, based on your circumstances, this is what you could expect most likely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always say prep by trying to find documents that you think, if the person's going to hide money, like, try to look through that. You know, try to maintain, like, if like, let's say I don't know, this is really chauvinistic, but if a dad comes in and you can tell that they're not super involved in their kids because they're out busting their ass every day, like I say, start going to the soccer practices, you know, start going to the math tutoring, you know, make sure you're picking your kids up and doing the parent teacher conference, know your kid's pediatrician's name,
right?
At least, you know, be a part of their life and start establishing that relationship. Because if you were absent and then all of a sudden you file and you're thinking you're going to come in and just, I'm taking half the time. Like, that's a hard one, right?
Yeah. They're like, you don't have the time, sir.
Yeah.
Where have you been?
Yeah. Like, you can be an every other weekend dad. Nobody wants to be a Disneyland dad. They all want to be as involved in their kid's life as they possibly can.
Yeah.
So you got to start acting like it.
Right.
As you're prepping for it.
Yeah.
Right? So
if a real estate agent gets a call today, someone's going through a divorce, they want to move out, are there any questions that they should ask right off the bat? Anything that they just need to know immediately to help set them up for success?
Yeah. So it doesn't happen often, but you're saying if a real estate agent calls to ask for a divorce, or a divorced couple calls a real estate agent? A divorced
couple calls a real estate agent. We're getting divorced. The husband's moving out. What is the real estate agent? How do they need to approach that situation?
Yeah. First thing, do you want to try to keep the house? Yeah. Like, first question, do you want to stay in the house? Do you want to try to sell the house? I mean, I'm assuming they're calling a real estate agent because they're looking at selling the house, right? And if that's the case, is there enough equity in the house to justify? Some people are upside down, right? Yeah. Some people have like financed the crap out of their properties, and now property values have come down and they owe more money and they're kind of screwed, right? And so sometimes there is no exit strategy for them. And that, again, then they have to live in the house together. Yeah. Nobody can get out. And so, but that would be the first, obviously, but I think any real estate agent would do that type of due diligence. The first thing is, can you even sell the house? Yeah. And then if not, or if you can even, do you want to stay in the house, right? Because sometimes a real estate agent can help with that transaction, right? I think sometimes, like, if you have somewhat of a complicated transaction, some real estate agents can turn around and say, okay, well, we're going to sell the house to you and potentially your mom that can help you stay in the house.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know, so if there isn't an ability to potentially like buy the house directly, you may need to bring a third party in to help them.
Yeah.
And that's maybe where a real estate agent could help as well.
Yeah.
And so,
And then does one person kind of drive the ship? Because I know there's a friend of mine who's a real estate agent, and I remember she was selling this beautiful home. The couple was going through a divorce, and the husband was adamant, we are not staging, we are not spending any money on this. And the wife really wanted to try to get top dollar. And it was just everything, every step along the way. It was just an argument and a fight between the divorcing couple.
yeah.
So is there anything,
Yeah.
like, how does that work from a legal perspective?
Yeah. So
You're like, oh yeah, I know all about
no,
this.
so it's like whether you're post or pre-decree, right? If you're pre-decree, the court still has jurisdiction over all of this. And so if you know you're going to sell the house, you should start doing it before the decree actually comes down.
Interesting.
Yeah. If you're like, hey, we're going to sell the house, and then you get divorced, and now all of a sudden you're 6 months later and you're still trying to sell the house, you've got to file special motions to kind of get back in front of a judge to reopen this case. And more times than not, I mean, it's sad to say it, but these judges are way overworked.
Yeah.
You know, every
Interesting.
single year, there's at least 3,000 cases that are filed in any one of these districts that are here in this Denver metro area. And there's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we maybe have 3 judges in each district, sometimes 2. And so when you're thinking 3,000 cases, that's 6,000 people.
Yeah.
Right? Not to mention all the kids. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of names and things going on for these guys, and they're way overworked. And so if you literally in a post-decree world come in and you say, hey, I just want to get the house sold, and the other person comes and says, hey, I want to spend some money to get it staged because I think we can make more money, the judge is going to say, just get the fucker sold.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't have time for this shit. Just
Yeah.
get it out of here.
Yeah.
And so if you're pre-decree, that's a little different. Right? Because the judge is actively working your case. Like you have temporary orders under 16.2, which is our case management rule in Colorado. The courts are required to kind of maintain active case management, which means we have a little bit different of a process in a divorce case. I can literally email a clerk and ask to get FaceTime with the judge on issues that are somewhat pressing like that. And I don't always have to file motions. In fact, some judges say, don't file motions. I want you to just reach out, call the clerk.
Yeah.
And so we get really quick access sometimes to courts. And so in that circumstance, we could say, hey, look it, this realtor is saying we need to stage this, spend the money, give a little bit of extra time. Then the judge's first question is going to be, well, who can afford to pay for that?
Right.
Okay, it's going to be $5,000 to stage this thing. You know, okay, wife, if you have the $5,000, pay it. You'll get paid back when the house gets sold, and then you guys will split whatever remainder is different. And judges can do that a lot more rapidly pre-decree. So I guess the advice is don't wait until you get divorced to at least actively try to sell your house. Get it on the market, get it going.
Yeah.
But that brings in other issues, like if you're living in the house and you know, how do you move out until you get that big chunk of cash and you pre-decree and you're trying to do that and you sell the house. But again, if there's issues in escrow, there's issues in dividing the estate, and there's issues in doing those things, you can get the court involved to try to resolve those issues quicker.
It just sounds so expensive. Everything about this conversation, I just see like dollar signs between the house and the interest rates and your fee and having to, you know, plan ahead with everything. And it just sounds, I mean, you don't want to live in the house with someone who you don't like, but I can understand why people do that.
Sure. Yeah. It seems expensive. I mean, there are, there are some very, very good attorneys out there.
Yeah.
There are some not so good attorneys out there. And then there's some attorneys that are very good, but also very proud of their work.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think just finding somebody that has a reasonable rate that's not just kind of like pillaging the community. And there are some really good attorneys out there that do that are not out there just like I'm billing like $600 an hour, even though the work product that I do is just as good as somebody else that bills at like $250 to $350 an hour. Right. And so, you know, I think other avenues are available for people. Just going to a really expensive lawyer or firm does not mean you're going to have a much better result. When
Right.
you walk into
That's good to know.
court.
Right.
So
should you wait to file to get some of your ducks in a row? Because it sounds like once you file, there's that ticking clock. And if you have a lot of the untied, you know, you've got a lot of logistics to figure out. Should people wait to file and try to figure some of those things out first?
sometimes, right?
Okay.
You know, if you can, and you guys are in, like, people are in somewhat of an amicable relationship, sure. Yeah. I mean, take the time. Your court process is going to be way faster, right? Like, I mean, you can get divorced in 92 days.
Really?
Right. Yeah. Like if everything's lined up and you're ready to rock and everybody's kind of come to terms, yeah, you have to wait at least that. You can't get divorced quicker. The court is by law required to make you wait. But I've literally drafted up entire divorces, like petitions, summons, case information sheets. I've had sworn financial statements done for my client, and then the other person had their sworn financial statements done. We've done massive disclosures. Those are all the things you have to do to get divorced. If there's kids, we've sent them off to do their court-ordered parenting class, which isn't a class that teaches you how to parent. It's a class that teaches you how to co-parent, right?
Oh.
And so you have to do that if you have kids. And once you're done with all of that, then literally you can write up your agreement and put it in a nice little packet, walk to the clerk's window and just hand it to them. And the clerk just sits there and says, thanks, cool. And they put it all in the system and then they tickle it on the court's calendar for the 92nd day. If you've got kids, you have to do one quick little appearance. But if you have two really good attorneys that work together really, really well, that have it's not the mindset of like, I'm going to churn this case out to make as much money on it as possible, but two really good attorneys that can sit down before the filing is even done. And you could say, okay, here's how we're going to do this. Here's how we're going to do that. We can collaboratively work the deal together. You get the house sold, you get people stabilized, you get everything put together, and then boom, you file the case and it's done.
Yeah.
Do you have some of those collaborative partners that you work with a lot?
Sure. But
Okay.
I also have ones that I'm very adversarial with too. And so
Interesting.
I would say family law is an extremely adversarial area of law.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like notoriously, people are very, very like mean sometimes to each other, terse,
Yeah.
disrespectful. And so it doesn't happen often. But yes, I do have a group of people that I typically work really well with.
Yeah.
And I try to maintain good relationships with people. But you find a lot of times attorneys take on that emotion of their client, right?
Yes. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Such an emotional process.
Like this is my child, even
Yeah.
though it's not their child. You know, it's just, like it's not your child. like think about like the reality that I've never had a client walk into my office and think, man, that guy's a piece of crap,
Yeah.
right? And I can't presume that the other person is a piece of crap.
Right.
I've never had it happen to me.
Yeah.
So why would I presume that the other person is? And so I always try to keep this open mind that like both of these parents, both of these people are people. They're good people. And at one point they loved each other, you know, so they can't be awful, all of them, you know. So if you can kind of maintain that mindset, usually you can kind of maintain a more amicable, collaborative process.
Yeah.
So
It seems like you really try to take the high road when working with your clients to just separate the drama from the reality. Let's move forward in this business transaction. Has anyone ever fired you because of that?
totally.
Really?
Yeah. And I'm okay with that.
Oh, but totally.
Yeah.
That's
That's
not
not
your
your
person
client.
anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, sometimes their case objectives just are very different from mine.
Yeah.
Right. And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's totally okay. If they have like these goals that they want to accomplish that I know they're never, sorry, my stomach's growling, so I don't know if you guys can hear it. It's going to be in the background. But yeah, no, if they've got goals that are so different from mine, or if I see that they're doing something that's just like abusive towards the other side, like I don't work really with abusive people.
Yeah.
I don't like it. Like I go home at night and I want to put my head on my pillow. I want to be able to snuggle with my kids.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to bring that toxic crap to my house.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I've fired clients for it.
Yeah.
Like I've had them fire me for it. And I'm 100% fine. If we don't get along, they don't trust me, they should find somebody else.
Yeah.
If I don't trust them, like I don't have any interest and I don't need to work with them. And
Right.
so, yeah.
I think that's really smart because I would imagine that living in that world all day long where people are just so emotionally charged and angry and just wanting to like nitpick at every little thing, that would I'm assuming, take a toll on you. And then you go home and you're like, oh my gosh, everything is just so negative. So it's good that you've tried to, weed those people out.
Yeah. I think that happens to younger attorneys a lot.
Yeah.
Right. When they're first getting into practicing law and especially family law, they really absorb that. Like they kind of take that on themselves and it's unhealthy. You know, it was super interesting that I did yesterday, like to go back to the housing and things like this.
Yeah.
One of the things that I always do, like if somebody is going to keep a house, right, in a divorce, for me, it's standard practice. It's probably not standard practice in the community, but for me it is. I always get them out to a broker immediately. If you're going to keep the house, you got to go see a mortgage broker. You got to figure out, can you qualify for this? I want to have some sort of like pre-off letter, something that says that you are able to kind of maintain this, cash the equity out that we think you might need in order to get the other person off the loan, I always do that right out of the gate, right? That and I get an appraisal done, like right out of the gate. 2 things. Before I even usually hit the first appearance with the court, I'm already working on that. The reason I do that, though, is because a lot of times what happens is you'll go through the entire process and you'll say, hey, my client's going to keep the house and they're going to cash out this much equity to the other side. And then you do this great deal, everything works great, and everybody just kind of like pushes the paper off their desk and they pull the next paper on, and then 6 months later, 3 months later, their financing falls through and they can't do it. And now what are you going to do, right? Like you've got a house that can't be refinanced, and the only thing you can do is sell it.
Yeah.
And then at that point, how do you divide the equity in the house? Because if we're going to sell it, now we're kind of rewriting the terms of the deal, because there's closing costs and all of these other things are going to have to kind of hit these parties. And who's going to share in those closing costs? How are you going to share in all of that? And so I always want to know before I write up a deal with somebody. But here's what happened in court yesterday. I went into El Paso County and I have this case, and it was a pretrial conference. It was all WebEx. And the judge did it really smart. It was a group pretrial. I've never had this happen before. Usually on a pretrial, the judge says, hey, you got trial in a month. Can you guys announce ready? If you're announcing ready for trial, here are all the things that I expect. I want exhibit books this way. I want them labeled that way. I want them, filed or not filed in the court record. I want yada, 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 right? But she does this whole advisement for probably like 7 or 8 different cases that are all going to trial. Oh. And I've never had that happen. Like I've seen that happen in criminal cases, but not on a pretrial in a domestic case. And then at the very end, but one of her pretrial orders was, if you want to keep the house, you better come in with some sort of documentation saying you can keep the house and refinance it. And I was like, thank you. Thank you, Judge, because this is super important. It saves us work if you can. And so,
That's smart.
Yeah.
That's cool. They're getting smarter.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that they're starting to realize I don't want to deal with a contempt 6 months down the road.
Yeah. If they're that overworked, they're probably like, I'm going to
like, just show me efficient. You can do what you think you can do.
Right.
And so.
Do you also refer out a realtor? Like, is that part of your?
Sometimes I do.
Okay.
Yeah. We have, I would say my firm is probably about 30% Spanish speaking clients.
Okay.
And so a lot of times, like, finding a good realtor that can speak Spanish can be hard. Right. And we have a few that we work with, but
we have a good one for you, by the way.
Great. Yeah. I'm happy to refer off to good. But yeah, sometimes they're hit and miss, right?
Yeah.
And I do have a couple realtors that I typically work with that I really have had good experiences with. But a lot of times people come into this process and they already know somebody that they've worked with in the past. And so I usually let them decide how they want to kind of go about that. If they haven't been happy in the past and they're looking for a referral, then cool. But I'm always looking for people, not just to sell houses, but to be an expert in court too. And so if you guys know any realtors that have experience or are comfortable potentially walking into court to testify as certain experts, what
would they testify about?
Like, for example, like typically we'll get an appraisal done on a property, but let's say like if you're in that post-decree world and you're trying to sell the house, right? And the realtor would need to be comfortable coming in and telling the court, here's why we can't sell it. We need to stage it.
Yeah,
right. In my opinion, you could get this much more money if you staged the house. Or if you're in the middle of like a temporary orders or something kind of like that, like we need to do these types of things. A realtor would be the expert to tell the court, this is the best way to go about getting the maximum dollar out of the house. A lot of times realtors don't want to be sucked into the middle of it. They don't want to sit there on the stand, be sworn under oath, and be grilled by attorneys saying, why do you think it's reasonable to spend $5,000? Like, and then to justify that opinion with factual basis. Like, so if you know somebody that can do that, that could be really helpful.
Okay. We had one of our business partners get divorced this year that's a very successful real estate agent. And she was kind of blown away at how she had a pretty complex real estate portfolio, her and her husband. And she was kind of blown away at how the real estate portfolio was handled by the courts, the attorneys. And so I think it is interesting to have somebody come in, and especially when your clients they own a lot of real estate, right?
Yeah.
To give, because you were talking about like staging, but what about like deferred maintenance? Like what if the spouse that keeps the house, there's a lot of deferred maintenance with that house? That's a consideration. The appraisal doesn't give the whole picture, right?
Right. Or like if it's residential property, the appraiser is not going to talk about whether or not that residential property has a certain amount of rental income within the market. Like, I mean, a realtor could testify to say, hey, this could potentially bring in this much rental income, right? And so a lot of times people with a pretty decent real estate portfolio, they both have commercial and residential properties that generate income for them.
Oh yeah.
Right. And valuing that income as it plays into maintenance, as it plays into like the division of assets, all of that's super, super complex. But the reality is if you put that in front of a judge, the judge isn't going to want to spend that much time trying to figure it out. Right. So it always behooves you, if you have a pretty complicated financial portfolio like that with a lot of different real estates, multi-sources of or income that are being generated, like you really, really should be trying to handle those things with good attorneys trying to resolve that. Never put that kind of stuff in front of a judge.
Interesting.
They just don't have the time to really grasp it.
Okay.
And then you're going to put your expert on the stand. They're going to put their expert on the stand. You're going to have two talking heads saying two totally different things. The judge is going to be like, down the middle.
Yeah.
That's how it's going to go down. And you're going to spend, $100,000 to do that. And
$100,000
between the two attorneys and all the experts, sure. If you have that many financial assets, yeah, like,
wow.
I mean, if like a commercial property alone to get appraised can cost upwards of like $20,000 to $40,000.
Wow.
Just that commercial property.
20 to 40.
Sometimes I've had them go that high, yeah.
That's outrageous.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Stay married.
Yeah.
Or don't get married.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't say that. Get married. Like one of the best decisions I've ever done. Like, my wife's amazing. But,
Let me ask you this. Okay, so a husband and wife are getting divorced. Their house is for sale. The husband has moved out. The wife is waiting. She's going to move out. They're getting offers. The wife's like, sweet, let's sell it. And the husband's like, nope. Can they do that? What
is it pre or post decree? Pre-decree. Then typically no, right? Like like I said, you can get an email to a clerk or you can file a quick motion with the court to say, hey, look, we have an offer and this is an emergency issue. We need to accept it or reject it. We think we should accept it. Then yeah, you can kind of get that moving quicker. If the husband can come in and articulate why you should hold out because they think it's way under market, he better have an expert to come in and explain to that judge why in that circumstance they should not accept the offer.
Okay.
And it may be because like, well, my best friend's going to buy it for like 40% under market value and then sell it back to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that could be why the court would reject it.
Okay.
Right?
And then what if it was post decree? How does that change?
Post decree is a lot harder, right? I don't typically see that. Usually the person that's out of the house, they want it gone, but it's the person that's in the house that wants to keep it, right? And the problems that you run into are the person that's in the house doesn't want to sell it. And so every time that there's a showing, the house looks like crap. Like there's shit everywhere, like clothes, like dishes are piled up.
Pee in the toilet.
Pee in the toilet, it makes it stink, right? Like all of that. That's the typical situation. And so then you have to go to the court and be like, here, judge, here's a bowl of pee, here's the picture, and that's the typical situation.
And does a real estate agent though, because if I were a real estate agent and that was happening, I would be so frustrated. I would feel like I would want to sue the person who's kind of bottlenecking the whole situation. Like, you're wasting my time.
Yeah.
Are agents entitled to anything like that?
Well, that's what, like, you can, if they're willing to come to court and just say to the judge, like, yeah, every time we walk in here to show this house, there's a big, stinky, smelly bowl of pee in the toilet, right? Like, and that judge is going to hammer that person who's holding it up. If the real estate could just say what they're seeing and why it's not selling.
Right.
But they're so apprehensive sometimes to do that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like, yeah, they're working their butts off.
Right.
Like, they're generating business. They're showing up at a house. They're trying to get, and like they're entertaining offers that are just going to be rejected. Like, what a waste of time.
100%, because they don't get paid an hourly wage. Like, they need this house to close.
Yeah. And so, like, if they're willing to just tell the court why it's not selling, like, it could make it so much easier. Like, it's hard to get somebody that's confident enough to walk in and be subjected to scrutiny, though.
Yeah.
I
wonder if up front someone's getting divorced, and if up front an agent can say, okay, we agree, we're going to list for $500,000, but we will accept an offer as low as $480,000 or something up front, so that if they decide, if things get worse.
That would be a smart thing for the agent that's working with the marital couple to say, okay, we need to have a margin here to work within.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And you can write that into your deal.
Right.
Your divorce decree. You can write it into your permanent orders if you do an agreement, right? And so if you're working with a realtor and like if you're pre-decree and you're working with your realtor and you know approximately what the house should sell for and you have a maximum and minimum and both parties can agree, boom, right there in the paperwork, that if you get an offer within that range, it will be accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a smart way to do it.
Yeah. That'd be really smart. Just
But
set
again,
yourself
you
up.
have to have those people around you. You have to have a good realtor. You have to have mortgage brokers. The people that know how to do that have to be really actively involved in that process. Or if you don't, like, we're just going to be like, okay, cool, you keep the house,
Yeah.
you know, and like move on, right? Because it's easier. We're all busy. So,
Yeah.
Is Colorado like a 50-50 state, right? Like,
so we are not,
okay.
but we are,
Okay.
right? And so there are two types of states. Like we have like community property states, like Washington State would be a community property state. Colorado is called like an equitable division state.
Okay.
So we really divide property by what feels good,
Okay.
right? What's equitable, what's fair. 9 times out of 10, it's 50-50,
50-50.
right?
Yeah.
And so, but there are certain circumstances where it makes sense not to do a 50-50 division, right? Like if you have a marriage that's lasted 2 years,
Yeah.
and one person kind of is like used massive amounts of their resources to buy everything
Yeah.
in there, the court looks to how that property was acquired, right? Here's a really, really good example about real estate, right? Like if you have a property and you come into the marriage with this piece of real estate and you sell that piece of real estate, you get all of, and it's your separate property, right? Because you walked into the marriage with it. The only marital portion of it is going to be from the day you got married until you sell it, whatever that increase is from that little short period of time, right? That's all marital. That's the only marital portion. So if like 90% of it is your separate property, and you technically are entitled to all 90% of it, no matter what the divorce decree says. Now, let's say you take that, all of the proceeds from that property, and you purchase another house that you jointly title with your spouse. Guess what? 100% of that is marital property now.
Oh.
You know? And so, like, unless you can show to the court, it's a clear and convincing burden. It's a really, really high burden in a civil case. That one, you did not intend to make that a gift to your marriage, and 2, you can track the separate property that you had before it. Both of those things have to be shown clear and convincingly.
So could you do like a take title instead of joint tenancy? You take it tenants in common, and that's how you would.
Or just buy it separately.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
Or draft up a quick little agreement
Yeah.
saying, hey, you know, I'm entitled to this 90%. I'm going to sink this into the house, and I'm going to keep that.
Yeah.
But if you just took all of your separate property and purchased a brand new house, that, again, the increase during the marriage is still marital property, right? So if that 90% generated massive amounts of money, there still would be a division of that, but you'd still at least be able to get your 90% back, right? And so it's a really, really important tool. Like if you're entering into a marriage and you have other assets that you're trying to pull back and you want to keep protected, just make sure you're cognizant of how you're dealing with your separate property during the marriage. Anything you jointly title during a marriage with your separate property is almost always going to be marital property, right?
So what if I'm in a hostile marriage and we have a marital property together and I decide we need space? I don't want to get divorced yet, but we need space.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go buy another house because we have the financial means to do that, but I'm going to just buy it myself. Is that marital property?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter how it's titled in that sense,
Okay.
right? Like same thing. If you go out and buy a car,
Yeah.
most of our cars are probably not jointly titled, right? You just buy the car, they title it in your name.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. That car is marital property, right? So how
So
things are
buying
titled-
a house
Same.
in the middle of a marriage, another one to get out of your marriage is not a good idea.
I mean, it can be,
Okay.
right? Because you're still earning equity
Yeah.
on the property,
Yeah.
right? And you're taking marital assets that may not be generating that type of income. Like they may not be inflating. They may not be getting their time value of money that they would be if they were in
Okay.
a piece of real estate potentially.
Yeah.
And so it still may be a good idea to do it. But, you know, the reality is you most likely will probably end up with that house.
Okay.
But if there has been a massive increase in value in that property with that marital property that you used to purchase it, you're going to have to split it.
Could you buy that
Interesting.
house, your escape house? Could you buy it in the name
escape
of a
house.
trust or a business or something like that to circumvent the situation?
Not really. Yeah. So we're trying to figure out how to like
Jason needs to watch this episode.
skirt the law.
Well, I have to tell you, it's so funny. I was telling my husband as I was like researching this, and I said, by the way, don't get freaked out if you see my Google search history. I promise I'm not divorcing you. He was like, damn it, I thought you were.
I mean, so yes and no. I mean, The answer to that is no, right? Because anything that you acquire during the marriage, including any type of, business entities or trusts, all of that is marital property.
Okay.
Like if you own an interest in anything, and we have pattern discovery that we send out almost on every single case, and it's pretty good. It captures almost all of that. If you have any interest in a trust, if you have any interest in any business entities, if you have any interest in any type of real estate, like if you have a bank account where you have money in it, even though your name's not on it, you still have to disclose it.
Yeah.
Right? And so the information that they ask for in the process is pretty comprehensive. So if you're being honest, then no. Like if you're being honest with the process, and everybody should be.
Yeah.
I always tell people, like, if you lie to me, you're kind of like, you're hurting yourself.
Because we're going to find out.
Yeah.
Well, not just that, but I'm a really competitive person.
Yeah.
I want to win.
Yeah.
Like I just want to win, but I don't want to win because we're cheating. Like I hate winning that way. And if I find out my client's cheated, I'm pissed.
Yeah.
Right. But I want to win because I want to kick their ass.
Yeah.
Right. And so just be honest about it. And then we'll go out and we'll kick their ass.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, like, I mean, if you buy the escape house, right? I mean, the best way to do it is to just be upfront with it and just say, hey, look, I'm going to take, this $300,000 that we have liquid in this account, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to purchase this house. You have your TSP or whatever it is. You have your 401k that's worth about the same. And if you're trying to, like, in your circumstance, you're saying an abusive marriage, right? A lot of times that's not an option. You just can't do that, right? Mm-hmm. So you may just do it and then just bite the bullet and divide the proceeds 50-50, or like cash them out, or just don't buy it with a lot of equity. Like put
minimal down.
Little down as possible. And
then you're bringing a new debt to the marriage, but not very many assets. Okay.
Yeah. So don't try to like put a massive down payment on it. And so
what about a prenup? What are your thoughts on prenups? And are they enforceable? Because I always hear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, they're enforceable if they're done right.
Okay.
I don't do them.
Okay.
Why?
Because if you did usually you don't know if you did it right until 15 years later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want your old clients.
Yeah. Like 15 years later, somebody comes back like, you screwed me, man. Like, sorry, dude. I thought I did it right. So I just don't like that hanging over my head.
Yeah. It's true.
But no, they are absolutely enforceable. If you set them up right, and the best way to set them up right is just have two attorneys on the case. You just got to have like a good disclosure. People got to know what it is that they're signing away.
Yeah.
And if there's it's super voluntary and there's a good disclosure and it's open and it's well written, then yeah, they're enforceable. With one caveat: maintenance or spousal alimony may not be enforceable. Right. In your prenup, if you say, hey, listen, I'm going to waive my right to any type of spousal alimony or maintenance, and I'll never ask for that in a divorce, the court still can give that maintenance.
Mm-hmm. That's good to know.
Because they're going to look at it at the time of the divorce, right? They're going to look at it. And if you can meet the burden to override that, then the court.
Because the court is never going to I feel like we're being so traditional roles with this conversation, but they're never going to let a woman who has been taken care of by her husband for 15 years, all of a sudden just be out on the streets and be like, nope, sorry, he doesn't have to give you anything. No, regardless of what she did, right? Like,
maybe.
Really?
Yeah, maybe. If you've got a good prenup, I mean, the court, oftentimes, if I have somebody come in to my office and they have a prenup, like I will file a motion, or I'll file the petition, and I'll file a declaratory judgment. I call it a deck action. I'll file a deck motion with it. And I'll say, declare that this contract is binding right on the very first day. And they have to, the courts have to do it if it's a binding. And other people will object, like, oh, this prenup wasn't like fully disclosed, or it was done unconscionably, or whatever.
Yeah.
And the court will have a hearing on it, but it's a really, really hard burden.
Wow.
Like most judges will just rubber stamp them.
Wow.
But
if you don't have a prenup, housewives are not going to be living on the streets, right?
If they gave away all their rights, yeah.
But if they don't have a prenup.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I mean, they'll divide what you've accumulated.
Yeah.
Right? If people have lived up to their eyeballs in debts and they have no assets, then yeah, she might be.
Yeah.
But that's the life choice, right?
So if the husband is saying, go ahead, you try to divorce me, you'll be poor and living on the streets, that's not going to happen.
That's the one comment that pisses me off.
Yeah.
Because that is so false and not true.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there is no court in this world that's going to sit back and take away all of the assets. And if you have a good attorney and the husband's trying to hide them, that judge is going to slam them
Yeah.
once they find out that they've been dishonest with the court. So
How do the courts find out about their assets when they hide them?
the attorney does it.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does the attorney find them?
With discovery. Like,
Okay.
I mean, we hire investigators.
Okay.
I had this one case where this guy had this business where he was buying and selling washers and dryers out of his garage. Right? And it doesn't seem like it would generate that much money,
Yeah.
but it did. Like, this guy was making a lot of money. He would buy all these broken down washers and dryers and he would fix them and drive them down to Mexico and he would sell them, or he would post them on Facebook. He was making like $5 or $6 grand a month.
Oh,
Whoa.
wow.
Yeah, I was shocked. And my client kept telling me this, but he kept saying, "No, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true." So I hired my investigator to go up, and he had these cool little glasses with the camera on it.
No way.
And they bought a dryer right out of his garage, paid him $250 for the dryer, loaded it in the back of the truck. It was sitting in my garage for like 3 months, waiting for my client to come pick it up. And so when we walked into court, he didn't know we had this, but I had disclosed the witness saying, "Hey, I have this investigator." But his attorney never actually called to check up what this guy's going to testify to. So we're sitting there in court, and I play the video of them walking up and buying this dryer right after the guy testifies in court, like, "I don't do that. I haven't done that in years." And so that judge slammed him, held him
I
in
bet.
contempt, gave the wife everything that she wanted.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
Good.
it was brutal on him.
You must
Yeah.
have felt so happy in that
I
moment.
hate it when people lie. I
Yeah.
just
Yes.
hate it when people lie.
Yeah.
Especially in court. Like, the process doesn't work if people don't tell the truth.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, but yeah, it was pretty fun. It was a pretty good day.
Wow.
What do you think about prenups? Like people, if you weren't married and
Yeah.
someone asked you to sign a prenup, like, do you feel like that's
I personally, I would sign one in a heartbeat. I want, when my kids to get married, I want their wives to sign a prenup. I want them to sign a prenup. People don't go into a marriage thinking that they're going to get divorced. But the reality is divorce happens all the time. And even this conversation makes me believe in it even more, because things get messy and it's emotional and people get crazy. It's like, if I love you and you love me and we're going to be married for forever, who cares? But if something happens, then this document will come into play. I have no problem with it.
Yeah.
I think it's a red flag if you do have a problem with it.
See, my sister-in-law is an attorney and she's pretty well off, and her son is of the marrying age and
Yeah.
has been in a relationship for a few years. So we got into this conversation about whether a prenup is like offensive to, like, when you're going to ask someone to marry you, like, that's a
I mean, you're not like on one knee, like, will you marry me? But
Please sign this.
sign this, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
but they
that-
do go hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
right, you say yes to getting married, but then, hey, we also need to talk about this.
Yeah.
I've had
It's-
multiple attorneys draft up this agreement that if we don't make it, like, you don't get any of
Yeah.
the wealth I'm bringing into the marriage. So there's that component. I agree with you. Like, I was on the side that was for them,
Mhm.
because if it is her money, like the mom's money and not his money, so it's like money that he's inheriting,
Right.
right? Is that something that,
Yeah.
you know, she should have a stake in if they're, you know, so.
I just think, what's the downside? Like, does it maybe hurt someone's feelings momentarily? Fine. But like, if you're that much in love and you want to get married and all this stuff, you see past it and you see, like, okay, you know, you're just, no one thinks that they're going to get divorced.
And the statistics are in your favor. that
Right.
You're going to.
Yeah. So, duh.
Well, I think that a lot of times people think prenups are just like all or nothing, right? Like, there are varying degrees of what will be considered and what will not be considered marital property or divisible at the end of the estate or at the end of
Yeah.
the marriage. And so, like, you don't have to say you get nothing. You could say, like, hey, these specific things, these specific assets I'm going to kind of keep, but the rest of it will remain marital. Anything else that we acquired during
Yeah.
Yeah.
like, so those, and a lot of times you see it just like in your circumstance where you're saying you have family members that have generated wealth and they're going to pass that wealth, and they have the interest of not, like, ensuring that wealth stays within their family,
Right.
right? And that's typically how you see it come up. And I find that it's a lot more of like a family conversation than it is just like two spouses doing it, right? And so you're kind of discussing like how, I mean, it's kind of like, it's almost like putting a will together. Like, how are you going to do this when you die? Like, how are you going to
Totally.
do this when you get divorced?
Right.
You know what I mean? But sometimes it's a good conversation to have. And it doesn't happen like as the proposal.
Yeah.
Like, hey,
Yeah.
But I mean, that might happen as you're doing your wedding planning and been like, hey, my mom and dad approached me with this, and I kind of think we should have this conversation. And maybe we could all kind of sit down as a family and kind of work it out. You can invite your parents, I'll invite my parents. And
100%.
Yeah.
And I know like people my age who their parents are getting remarried and, you know, someone's passed away or they got divorced and they're older. And these kids are like, kids, but people our age are like, hang on, mom or dad, what are you doing? You're getting married right now. You're 70 years old. Are we entering a prenup? Like, how is this all working? Because people take advantage of older people, you know? And so I think that in that situation, it's very, very important.
Yeah. Or even a post-nup, right? Like you can do a post-nup and let's say your parents are still alive, they're well, they're kicking, and you haven't even had a conversation with them about whether or not they have wealth to pass. And now all of a sudden they approach you and you're already married, and they may want to sit back and say, like, automatically anything you inherit is separate property, right out of the gate. But again, from the date of marriage or the date you inherit it to the day you get divorced, that is marital.
Interesting.
Right. And so like if you get, you know, massive amounts of like stock,
and
that stock goes through the roof, that increased while you were married is marital property. They get half. Well, presumably half.
Wow.
But you can always say, hey, look, my parents want to leave this in their estate to me, but they're not going to do that if there isn't a post-nup in place or a prenup in place. And then in that sense, it's kind of like out of your control, right?
Yeah.
Like, of course you're going to want the stock. You're
Yeah.
going to want to spend it as a married couple. You're going to want to go to vacay and like hit Disneyland with the kids. And so like, but sure, it's kind of the way they want to pass the money. And so that's also, post-nups are available too. It's not black and white. You don't have to say all or nothing. Like there's varying degrees of how intrusive you want them or restrictive you want them to be. So, but I don't do them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too much. Like
that's smart to be like, this is not my cup of
Can
tea.
you imagine? I'm retired. I'm sitting on a beach somewhere. It's like, hey, dude, I need your insurance information. Like, my wife got all of it. Like, sorry, dude.
Yeah.
I'm halfway through the margarita. I'm not dealing with that.
Yeah, you're like, by the way, I'm drunk right now.
Right.
So
Like, that
don't come
sucks
at
for
me with
you. Not so much for me.
Have you seen the best picture this year of Nora?
No, but I want to.
Have you seen it? Okay. It's the whole thing. There's a big prenup thing. So you guys should see it. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I just think like, what's the big deal? Just do it. Just have it as a safety net.
I think it's a business arrangement.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, I like
Yeah, you wouldn't start a business without having certain things in writing about how the business is going to work. Why, you know?
Just like the court doesn't treat your divorce as it's a business.
Yeah.
Dividing the business of your life, you should plan the business of your life.
Yeah.
Enjoy the emotions, keep the business separate, you know, if possible.
So real estate agents, what's one piece of advice we can give our audience that are real estate agents about their clients that are maybe going through a divorce?
I want to say like some profound like divorce real estate transaction advice, but I think that the biggest thing that I could say is, well, two things. Can I say two things?
Yeah, please.
Okay. The first thing is really be sensitive to the emotional things that they're going through, right? Like if they have to sell their house, like it's a huge departure of their life goals and their plans, and it could be involving with kids and everything. So really try to maintain that sensitivity. And then the second thing is don't be afraid when asked to come into court and tell the court what's going on if necessary, right? Like it's not a scary process. I mean, it's not like, you know, you can't handle the truth. Like it's not like, it's not like that, right? It's family law court is usually people that are practicing in a pretty respectful way. The judge maintains that respect and decorum in the court. They respect the people that come in that are not a party to the case, and they really want them to feel comfortable in that process. And so don't be afraid if you get subpoenaed into court. Don't be afraid to just volunteer. Like, hey, I'll come in and tell the judge that there's bowls of pee in the toilet. Like, I'm happy to kind of share this process with the court. Like, it's not a scary thing. And so
that's good advice.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good
Be
advice.
a part of it and be sensitive to the emotional process of it.
Great. Sean, how can our audience find you?
Well, we have peakfamilylaw.com. We're Peak Vasquez, but peakfamilylaw.com is kind of our website. Yeah, Peak is P-E-E-K.
That's good to know.
Not like Mountain Peak, but like Peekaboo.
Okay.
But most of the time it's just, call me 303-495-5757.
Okay.
I'm always around, but yeah, I don't really advertise a lot. I just kind of word of mouth.
Word of mouth.
Yeah.
That's great.
So,
Yeah, it was really fun to talk to you. I assumed it would be less fun. So this was a breath of fresh air. It was super fun.
yeah. No, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Of course. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to the This Jess'd In podcast. Thanks for joining us today.